Hello, and welcome to the Hawk's Nest. Thank you so much for tuning on in. My name is Brandon, and I know we have reached that dead period of the NFL offseason, that quiet time where there's just not a lot of action to talk about. No player transactions, no trades, not even any contract extensions. But I don't think that means that there isn't some stuff we can talk about here as we sit now on the precipice of a new NFL season. Hopefully there'll be an NFL season. And sitting first and foremost at that list for me is Antonio Brown. Now, there's been a lot of potentially reported interest between Antonio Brown and the Seahawks, or the Seahawks and Antonio Brown, or Russell Wilson and Antonio Brown to get him to the Seahawks. Whatever way it's working, however that dynamic is kind of playing out, there is certainly some kind of interest. And we saw a couple weeks ago a report came out that there were two teams that were hot to trot to find out what Brown could do for them. The first team was Baltimore Ravens. Now, they instantly shot down the report saying they had no interest nearly the next day after the report. This is a little bit odd because, of course, they have Antonio Brown's cousin, Hollywood Brown, on the roster, and they have a little bit of a need, you could say, at the wide receiver position. The Seahawks were the second team mentioned in that article, and they didn't shoot down those rumors. So there does seem to be some interest, and you combine this with the video of Geno Smith, current backup Seahawk quarterback, working out with Antonio Brown earlier this offseason. And then there's a video of Russell Wilson now that came out of Antonio Brown's Instagram account that broke in the last day, showing Russell Wilson throwing him a deep ball 50, 60 yards down the field and Brown running it down and getting it. So there again does seem to be a little bit of interest here, combined with the fact we know Russell has pushed management over at least the course of the last 18 months since Brown got released from the Raiders to bring him aboard onto Seattle. So it looks like maybe some of this could happen, and that does mean just one thing, of course. A shirtless Pete Carroll is going to be victim to the Antonio Brown hand towel closing technique. Put a robe on, Antonio. Put a robe on. In all seriousness, I still don't think there's a high likelihood that this happens. You've got to still factor in that commissioner ruling still sits above Antonio Brown's head like an anvil in a Looney Tunes cartoon, just waiting to smash him to a pancake at any point in time. And I know that last year he didn't play at the back half of the year, but it wasn't due to suspension. Any team theoretically could have signed him at any point in time. It was just not a well-kept secret that was known by pretty much everybody out there that if you did sign Antonio after the New England situation and those text messages that he sent out, he was going to then go on indefinite suspension, and no team wanted to take that risk at that point in time. So it still would look like to me that there's going to be some kind of punishment that will come down onto him. Maybe it's not for a full year because they will consider in the back half of the year and what he lost last year. But I think that that's going to be just enough to kind of upset this situation from occurring, especially when you consider you've got Josh Gordon on the other hand, a guy who's likely, it looks like, to come out of the suspension. He's just reapplied for reinstatement. A guy's not going to cost you a lot of money. A guy who's almost as talented as Antonio Brown. He's probably not at his level, but he's not that far off either necessarily at this point in time. So it's just a decent enough option as an alternative without having to take on all the headache, all the risk, and again, the commissioner's ruling with Antonio Brown. So overall, I give the Antonio Brown signing a 4 out of 10 on the hand towel scale.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
Another reason why I really feel like Josh Gordon's going to be the Seahawks' intended target rather than Antonio Brown is that Gordon's just seems so interested and intent on returning back to the team. You saw even after he was suspended last year mid-season that even just following along with his Instagram posts, he seemed to be remaining in Seattle. He didn't seem to leave. He was marveling at the beauty of the city. And you've seen recent Instagram posts showing him in a Seahawk uniform. And this kind of all bubbled up to a culminating point where a couple weeks ago he put out this Instagram post here over my shoulder where you see him attempting to use his seduction techniques on Schneider. Notice the eyes beckoning John, the text message that you would only send out at 2 a.m. We doing this or what? And I think that they are going to do it. You just have a guy that's just a natural great fit with Russell and his skill set. He showed out last year in the little bit of the sample size that we had. And again, he doesn't come with some of the same kind of headaches that Antonio Brown does, especially if, as we understand it, the CBA has lessened some of those penalties as far as the marijuana policy goes within the league. So I still look for Josh Gordon to be eventually the signing the Seahawks do go after.
I've seen some beautiful snags by 86. 5 receptions today. That's a season high for the rookie. As Jones has it taken away by Jamal Adams, and he is in for a Jets touchdown. He stripped the ball from Daniel Jones and scores. Oh my goodness.
Another very uber-talented player potentially being mocked to our Seattle Seahawks is Jamal Adams, the all-pro strong safety for the New York Jets. He's only been in the league for a couple years, but has really separated himself at that position as probably the best, if not one of the best, at the whole safety position in general. But it appears as we have this ongoing thing that we're seeing throughout the league where safeties just really struggle to get their value. They can't get the contract they want to get. We saw this with Earl Thomas where it just blew up to the point where he's flipping Pete Carroll off from the field as he gets injured because he felt like Seattle did him wrong. And then Earl went on the open market and he wasn't able to get anything more than a 2-year deal. So we're seeing this trend kind of continue here with Jamal Adams where the Jets aren't willing to reach his asking price, despite the fact this guy is really that good at the safety position to maybe be willing to ask for that kind of rate. So he's asked to be traded now. He submitted a set of 7 teams, all very good teams, I will say, that he wants to be traded to or he would consider to be traded to, that he won't ask then for a contract extension if he goes to them. He reportedly wants to go to a winner. He wants to win. He wants to have a chance at the Super Bowl. So Seattle is one of those teams that was included on his list, and that got a lot of Hawk fans interested. Certainly my brother, who has a huge man crush on this guy. But the likelihood still remains that this probably won't happen, and there's a couple of reasons that this comes into play. But I really break it down to kind of a formula if I had to, and that's going to be cost plus the current state of the position equals no deal. And I'll break this down for you. First, let's look at the cost. Now, before the reports broke that Jamal Adams wanted to be traded, the Hawks, because they're on it, because Schneider is already ahead of everybody else as far as a general manager in this league, he placed the call to New York. And he said, okay, hey, we noticed Jamal is out there and available and open, what would you want for him? Now, don't read into this that this necessarily Seattle's super hot to trot on him and wants that deal to happen. Absolutely. Just they are in on every deal. Schneider has said so all the time. He's in on every deal, but just because they're in on it doesn't mean they're going to do it. So they made the call to the Jets. The Jets general manager said, yeah, okay, we want to have Shaquille Griffin and a 3rd-round pick. And John Schneider raised his middle finger and hung up the phone. And rightfully so. That's one of the reasons that he's one of the best general managers in the league. That's way too high of a cost. You wouldn't want to do that in any way, shape, or form. Ideally, with this situation, it would come down to being able to offload a little bit so you wouldn't have to give up as much in draft capital. And that's where I come to the state of the position. You bring Quandre Diggs in last year from Detroit for a 5th-round pick, and he plays at probably a Pro Bowl level right out the chute, and should, I would think, play at nearly that level this next season, i.e., you're not really looking to replace him at this point as we move into this next season. Then at the strong safety position, you have Bradley McDougald, who likewise played at a very high level, has played at a pretty damn high level since he's arrived from Tampa Bay. Maybe not a Pro Bowler, maybe not an All-Pro, but just at that rung right a little bit below that. As well as last year, there was a report that came out that he was the 7th best defender in the entire NFL in coverage last year. That's a pretty high praise to come out there and say that about this player. He's going into a contract year. He only has 1 year left, but it's going to be hard to just unseat him. And you'd like, ideally, theoretically, to wrap him in a package with an associated draft pick to then bring Jamal Adams in if you made that move happen. The problem that comes into play here is that I believe the Jets drafted a guy, Ashton Davis, out of California last year in, I think, the 2nd round, who is himself a very good player, and they are very high on, and they would just slip him into Jamal Adams' starting spot if they moved Adams. So there just doesn't look like a high likelihood of the one thing that could separate Seattle from those other 7 teams being that we can offer you a upper level strong safety in return in addition to the draft capital. Now you can't really add that because the Jets don't really want it, and you're stuck with a gluttony of strong safeties and free safeties, especially if you can't package one of them in there. And you'd hate to package Marquise Blair into it, a guy you just picked in the second round last year, whose value you don't know. He may have all pro talent. He may be a perennial Pro Bowler, and it would suck to give him away at that point to just make sort of a lateral move to a guy like Jamal Adams. I like Adams a lot as a player. Of course, his 6.5 sacks last year would have led the Seahawks squad as a total. And I know that he has a little bit of questions about his coverage ability, but he's actually even a little bit above average in his coverage abilities as a strong safety too. So there aren't as many questions in that part of his gameplay. He'd be a great player. He'd elevate the position, even if it's just slightly over what we've had. You can't make any argument to that. But the cost in draft capital, the position of strength that you have on this team at the safety position, we are a team that doesn't have a lot of depth at a lot of different positions. This is one position we have a lot of talent and a lot of depth. So you're not really upgrading the team by trying to add to it is sort of my point. I think all of these reasons are associated with why Jamal Adams just probably is not likely a target to be traded over to our Seahawks. In our final segment today, I want to talk about the potential brilliance of our general manager, John Schneider, as it pertains to this particular offseason and the moves he's made. And please give me a second here to unpack this one. Now, when the season finished and we had lost to the Packers, I was actually as hopeful as I had been as a Seahawks fan going back 5 years for the year to come, for this offseason to come. I thought we were going to make a tremendous amount of moves and light the world on fire and take those extra couple of steps and signings to get ourselves to the promised land, back to the Super Bowl. Because I was keenly aware, if you go back the last 5 years, that the Seahawks have been carrying a huge amount of dead money seemingly every season. It's just been like a chain around our neck. And it happened because the Seahawks were very rewarding back in the Legion of Boom days. Everybody got a contract. It was like freaking Oprah with the cars. You get a car and you get a car. You get a contract and you get a contract. And a couple of these guys you even gave third contracts to. There's nothing wrong with this in itself. It's good to reward your players. The problem comes into play when these guys don't finish out their deals. In the NFL, contracts work that the bonus money is spread out evenly over a 4-year period, the first 4 years of the contract. So if a player leaves, moves on, retires early before those 4 years, the rest of the remaining bonus money accelerates onto your cap that year. And you can very quickly, if you get too many of these players retiring, moving on, going away, you can get a lot of dead money hitting that cap. And that's what happened with Seattle. You had your Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Cam Chancellor, Marshawn Lynch, even Doug Baldwin this last offseason. And so it's just kind of continued to sort of carry over and be kicked down the road a little bit. And this really reached its worst point if you look into the last offseason, where Seattle had almost no money to spend going into the offseason. John Schneider had only 4 draft picks for the upcoming draft. And he also had 4 foundational players who were all seemingly coming up for a new contract and wanting to be paid at maximum value. So Schneider had to get a little bit flexible last offseason, right? He had to get imaginative. And he moved Frank Clark. He was able to get maximum resources back, turn those resources into 11 draft picks from 4. He was able to eventually retain all of these other 3 foundational players. I think he did some of his most brilliant work last offseason. But this current offseason might end up eventually trumping even that. And that's where we'll get here on my point, which is that as you moved into this offseason, you had the opposite of what had happened the prior 4 years, 5 years. You had 50, 60, 70 million to spend in cap space. You had pretty much all of your draft picks, including the extra second rounder from the Frank Clark trade a year ago. Seattle had a lot of assets to utilize at that point. John Schneider could really go for it like he did in 2012 when he went out and got Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett and still even then made the trade with Percy Harvin when you still had Sidney Rice and Golden Tate and Doug Baldwin as your wide receivers. He was aggressive and he went for it, and we were all expecting something similar this offseason. Did that happen? No. Instead, it was like the air just got left out of all of us Seahawks fans who pay really close attention to it and was expecting it. We just sort of, You got marginal signings. 3 backup offensive linemen. Bruce Irvin's a great signing, but 33 years old, and you spent $6 million on him. Benson Mayowa is an okay rotational player, I suppose, but it's not going to get anybody super excited. You put $7 million to 35-year-old Greg Olsen, who's got some foot issues. It had everybody scratching their head. What's going on here? Why all the 1-year deals and 2-year deals and not any kind of like furthered extension point where you could kind of move some of that money over the course of the contract to relieve some of your cap situation in this year? So you could go for it this year, so you could maximize the cap, get as many players squeezed in as possible. So where's the brilliance? The brilliance comes into play in that I think John Schneider, I'm growing to believe that John Schneider was very visionary in how he saw the next upcoming season affected by COVID and how it will affect us moving forward. We know as we go into this next season, there's not going to be any off-season rookie mini camps, no training camps. They're already talking about a reduction of preseason down to almost nothing at this point. It looks like they might not even have any games in that respect. We don't know if they're going to play the full complement of NFL games throughout the year. That may be reduced. They're talking about not having any fans in the stadium. That's going to take out 30 to 35% of the profitability of the NFL in this upcoming season alone. Maybe they make up some of that on the television side because they have more viewership then. But it's going to have an impact as we go into this next season in that you're going to have teams that are going to be in a little bit of a disarray. In the respect of we're seeing with the college situation and the players coming onto campus now and being tested, and you're seeing in the NBA and some of the stuff we're in baseball, that you could have a roster suddenly get decimated, 25% of them with asymptomatic COVID symptoms that they're showing, and they're now having to be put into quarantine, not allowed to play. And let's say that that team's going up against a much lesser talented team, but that lesser talented team has the full complement of their roster because no one's sick and no one's tested positive. It's going to upset the competitive balance. It's going to be very hard to predict what then will happen. And it doesn't make a lot of sense at that point to squish as much as you can squish inside the salary cap for this next upcoming season. It's going to be a little bit of chaos. And then you factor in as well with this with John that he's looking ahead potentially to next offseason, because we know the Seahawks have the 2 and 3 year plan. And if they have the 2 and 3 year plan as it pertains to this COVID situation, then perhaps he's thinking and understanding that there's going to be an effect on the revenue on this downstream. You lose 35% of your gate this year, that's going to have some kind of effect on the revenue. Now, does it mean the salary cap will be reduced as we go into next year and the year after? Probably not. The NFL Players Association and the owners are working very hard to, at the very least, take these losses from this year and sort of massage them out over the next 4 to 5 years where maybe the cap stays stagnant and doesn't really grow, but there's not a loss as well. But this still will have an effect on teams because for the last approximately 20 years or so, the salary cap has continued to increase every year about 10%. There's certain years that are little fluctuations that are off that, but every year it's pretty much 10%. And so general managers throughout the leagues have budgeted their players, budgeted their contracts, structured them in such a way to account for that 10% increase that's going to bump up. Now, if that suddenly goes away, you're going to potentially have a flood of a lot of players that are going to be released from teams that are up against the cap who don't necessarily want to let these players go, but they have to make some tough positions because they weren't anticipating the stagnation of the cap. And this is the second part of where John Schneider's plan comes into play, in my opinion. And I'm not certain on this yet. This is just my going theory that I'm kind of working on. And that is when you look at the Seattle salary cap situation moving into next offseason, they're due to have, 60, 70, maybe even $80 million in cap space. They have pretty much all their draft picks. They're going to have an ability at that point to really then potentially go for it with all of those offseason mini camps and training camps, as well as the amount of quality players that will be available on the market will be like nothing we have probably seen over the last 10 years. If this plays out how it appears it will play out. At that point in time, Schneider is going to, for pennies on the dollar, be able to get some really, really great players, and his patience from this offseason will have truly paid off tenfold, potentially, moving into next offseason. We don't have a fixed date on this. We don't know that this is certainly what was at the forefront of John Schneider's mind, but it'll be interesting to hear if in his interviews as we move forward, he sort of references some of this potential thinking. Either way, I'm very glad that this guy's our general manager. All right, that'll about do it for us here today. Just want to let you know I'm currently hard at work on the Steve Largent career retrospective video. I'm hoping to have that out to you shortly, just going through all that late 70s, early game film, trying to make sure I don't miss any great catch in there. So please bear with me on that one. As well as I'm getting ready to start up on the next great Seahawk moment video. I'm kind of leaning towards doing the Denver Broncos Super Bowl win, but I'm open to some other suggestions as well. So if you got a great idea, please do post it down there in the comment if you have a particular game you'd like to see immortalized. As always, I appreciate you guys watching and liking and commenting and subscribing. You help this channel just continue to grow as we march towards 3,000 subscribers. We're so close. And don't forget it, just any of you out there are unaware, currently right now, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we are currently doing a live stream show. It's been going great every other Saturday. Have an awesome turnout. We're just talking Seahawks shop endlessly, 5, 6, 7 hours. I don't even know. So please come on in. Everybody's welcome. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Don't any of you forget. Don't ever forget. Go Hawks.